A plaintiff attorney doesn't read a medical chart the way you do. They're not looking at the medicine, they're looking at the story the chart tells a jury. And most of the time, the chart is telling a story you don't even know is there. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how a plaintiff attorney reads a hospital chart from the moment they open it, step by step. Whether you're a risk manager trying to get ahead of exposure or a defense attorney preparing your case, this is the framework the other side is using against you. Plaintiff attorneys don't win medical malpractice cases by proving bad medicine. They win by proving bad documentation. A jury doesn't understand hemodynamic instability or sepsis cascade, but they understand when a nurse was supposed to check on a patient every hour and didn't for 4 hours. The chart is the battlefield, and if you don't know how the other side reads it, you're already behind. Step 1. The very first thing a plaintiff attorney does is build a timeline. Not a medical timeline, a liability timeline. They're pulling every time-stamped entry from the chart, nursing notes, vital signs, medication administration, physician orders, lab results, and lining them up chronologically. They're not reading the chart like a story, they're reading it like a spreadsheet. What happened, when, and what should have happened in between. The gaps in that timeline are where lawsuits live. A 4-hour stretch with no nursing documentation on a high acuity patient is not a charting oversight to them. It's evidence. If your incident happened at 2 a.m. and the last nursing note was at 10 p.m., that 4-hour hole is going on a poster board in front of a jury. Step 2. They pull your hospital's policies and procedures. This is the part that surprises most people. Your own P&P becomes the plaintiff's primary weapon. They're not comparing your care to some abstract medical standard. They're comparing it to what your hospital said it would do. Your fall prevention policy says high-risk patients get bed alarms and hourly rounding. Your sepsis protocol says screening every time a patient meets 2 or more SIRS criteria. Your medication administration policy says reassess after narcotics. These aren't suggestions. In a courtroom, these are promises your hospital made. And the plaintiff attorney is about to show the jury everywhere you broke those promises. Step 3. They map every deviation. This is where timeline meets policy. The plaintiff attorney takes that chronological timeline and overlays it against every relevant policy. Where the policy says the nurse should have assessed, did she? Where the protocol says the physician should have been notified, was he? Where the order says the medication should have been held, was it given anyway? Each deviation gets documented, and they're not looking for one, they're looking for a pattern. 1 missed assessment might be defensible. 3 missed assessments, a skipped reassessment after narcotics, and no documentation of bed alarm activation, that's a pattern of neglect, and patterns are what juries remember. Step 4. They go deep into the nursing notes. This is where plaintiff attorneys spend the most time, and it's where defense attorneys and risk managers often spend the least. The nursing notes tell the real-time story of what was happening at the bedside. Plaintiff attorneys are looking for several things. First, changes in condition that weren't escalated. The nurse charted that the patient was increasingly confused and restless at midnight, but there's no documentation of a physician call until 6 a.m. 6 hours of documented decline with no escalation. Second, assessments that were due but never completed. Your policy says neurochecks every 2 hours post-fall. The chart shows one at the time of the fall and the next one 4 hours later. Third, copy and paste charting. When every nursing assessment for 3 shifts reads almost identically, plaintiff attorneys argue the nurse wasn't actually assessing the patient. She was clicking through the EHR. Juries understand that. They've all filled out forms without reading them. Step 5. Physician response times. The plaintiff attorney is looking for every instance where a nurse documented calling or notifying a physician. Then they're looking for what happened next. How long until the physician responded? How long until new orders appeared? Was the response appropriate for the situation? Here's what makes this devastating. A nurse charts MD notified of changing condition at 1 a.m. The next physician note is at 7 a.m. during morning rounds. The plaintiff attorney puts that 6-hour gap on a timeline in front of the jury and asks one question: is that acceptable? It doesn't matter what the physician says on the stand, the chart already answered. Step 6. Medication administration versus orders and assessments. Plaintiff attorneys look for medications given without proper assessment before or after. A narcotic administered without a pain reassessment documented afterward. A blood pressure medication given without vitals taken within a reasonable window. A sedative given to a fall risk patient without a reassessment of fall risk. Each one of these is a thread they pull, and each one connects back to a policy your hospital has in writing. They're not arguing that the medication was wrong. They're arguing that the documentation doesn't show anyone checked whether it was safe to give it. Step 7. How the adverse event itself was documented. This is where plaintiff attorneys look for two things that are equally damaging. First, sparse documentation around the event. If charting was detailed all shift and suddenly becomes a single line at the time of the incident, that inconsistency suggests something was missed or minimized. Second, the opposite. Overly detailed documentation that appears hours after the event. Late entries, addendums, and suddenly thorough charting that wasn't there before. Attorneys call this reactive documentation. It tells the jury that the staff knew something went wrong and tried to paper over it after the fact. Both extremes hurt. What helps is consistent, real-time documentation that matches the level of detail throughout the shift. Step 8. They hunt for contradictions. The nursing note says the patient was confused and combative at 2 a.m. The physician note at 8 a.m. says the patient was alert, oriented, cooperative, and in no acute distress. The vital signs at 3 a.m. show a heart rate of 112 and a blood pressure of 88/54. The nursing narrative at 3 a.m. says the patient was resting comfortably. Contradictions like these don't just weaken the defense, they destroy credibility. A plaintiff attorney will put these side by side on a screen and let the jury decide who's telling the truth. And when the chart contradicts itself, the jury trusts no one. That's when verdicts get large. Step 9. What isn't in the chart at all? This is the most powerful tool in a plaintiff attorney's arsenal. You can't defend documentation that doesn't exist. There's no bed alarm documentation because no one charted it. There's no fall risk reassessment because the field was left blank. There's no evidence of hourly rounding because the rounding log wasn't completed. If you didn't chart it, you didn't do it isn't just a nursing school cliche. It's the legal standard that plaintiff attorneys build entire cases around. Step 10. They build the jury narrative. Everything from steps 1 through 9 feeds into one thing, a story simple enough for 12 people who know nothing about medicine to understand. And that story almost always follows the same structure. The hospital had a policy. The policy existed to protect patients. The staff didn't follow the policy. The patient was harmed. This could have been prevented. That's it. 5 sentences. Every exhibit, every deposition, every expert witness is organized around making those 5 sentences undeniable. The timeline shows when things went wrong. The policies show what should have happened. The chart shows what didn't happen. And the plaintiff attorney connects those dots for the jury in a way that feels inevitable. If you're a risk manager, here's what this means. Every step I just described, the timeline, the policy comparison, the deviation mapping, the contradiction hunt, that's exactly what should be happening in your post-incident review. Not 6 months later when you get a demand letter, within 72 hours, before anyone outside your organization sees that chart. Because right now, in most hospitals, the first person who does a thorough chart review against the hospital's own policies is the plaintiff attorney. That's not risk management. That's hope. And hope is not a strategy when a single case can cost your facility 7 figures. If you're a defense attorney, here's what this means. You need to do this analysis before the plaintiff does. Not to find the bad news, you'll find that eventually, but to find the good news that's hiding in the same chart. Because charts also contain evidence of compliance, assessments that were done on time, escalations that were appropriate, policies that were followed. The problem is that most defense chart reviews focus on the medicine. Was the care appropriate? But the plaintiff isn't arguing about medicine. They're arguing about documentation and policy compliance. If your expert is only reviewing the clinical decision-making and not mapping every policy requirement against the chart, you're preparing for the wrong case. Here's the bottom line. A plaintiff attorney's chart review is systematic, methodical, and designed to find every gap between what should have happened and what was documented. It's not magic, it's a framework. And if you understand that framework, whether you're defending the case or trying to prevent the lawsuit in the first place, you can get ahead of it. The chart is either your best defense or your worst enemy. It depends on who reads it first and what they're looking for. That's the 10-step framework plaintiff attorneys use to turn your chart into a 7-figure case. If you're a risk manager, use this as your post-incident review checklist. If you're a defense attorney, use it to find the gaps before opposing counsel does. Subscribe to Chart Shield for weekly deep dives on chart review, documentation risk, and litigation strategy from the hospital defense side. Visit chartshield.ai to learn how we help hospitals and defense teams find the gaps before a plaintiff attorney does.